My name is Clara Kensington Hayes, and I'm 43 years old. 12 years ago, the night before Easter, I discovered I'd been erased from my own family. Removed from our WhatsApp group like a stranger, like someone who never belonged. My mother's message to my siblings was crystal clear. All my children are successful except Clara. She chose to be a lowly teacher. I no longer see her as my daughter. I didn't scream. I didn't call her crying. I simply disappeared the way she wanted me to. What my mother didn't know was that a decade later, I'd be standing on a stage in front of 800 people with the governor of Colorado shaking my hand, and she'd be sitting in the audience, uninvited, waiting for a moment in the spotlight that would never come. Before I tell you what happened next, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly speaks to you. Where are you watching from right now, and what time is it where you are? Let me start from the beginning. The night I realized I'd lost the family I thought I had, and began building the one I actually deserved. The rain was hitting my apartment window like tiny sharp fingernails tapping the glass. It was 10:35 p.m., on the Saturday before Easter, 2013. My red grading pen hovered over a stack of 5th grade spelling tests. My Toyota Corolla, 10 years old and whining in the cold, was parked outside in the dark. My entire apartment could probably fit inside my sister Audrey's walk-in closet in Denver. Then, my phone screen lit up the dim room. Chloe, my cousin. I slid my thumb across the cool glass. Hey Chloe, everything okay? Clara. Her voice was a thin, shaking wire. I could hear the sharp, jagged intake of her breath over the line. I need to tell you something. I didn't know if I should, but you deserve to know. My red pen slipped from my fingers. It hit the floor with a hollow click. My heart started a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. In my line of work, you learn to recognize the sound of bad news before it even leaves a person's mouth. What happened? Is someone hurt? Check your WhatsApp. The family group. I pulled the phone away from my ear, my thumb moving automatically. I scrolled down to the Kensington family dinner chat. My mother had made it 4 years ago to coordinate our perfect picture-ready holidays. I stared at the screen. The chat was gone from my active list. I had to search for it. When I clicked the name, a gray banner sat at the bottom like a gravestone. You are no longer a participant in this group. Chloe, my app must be glitching. I know they removed you, Chloe choked out, a sob finally breaking through. Your mom asked Audrey to do it last month. Audrey just got around to it this morning. Clara, I'm so sorry. I took screenshots of everything. I'm sending them to you now. My phone buzzed against my palm. One image, then another. The digital ink glowed brightly in the dark room. Reminder, Easter dinner at the Broadmoor. 6 p.m. sharp. All my children will be there. All my successful children. I read the words, but my brain refused to connect them. I thought of my mother, Beatrice. She had retired early at 58 just to spend more time cementing her status at the Pine Valley Country Club. I pictured her draped in her heavy Hermes scarves, armor made of silk, always smelling of expensive perfume and old money. I remembered her ordering a future doctor bumper sticker for her car when I graduated high school with a 4.2 GPA. And I remembered the crushing 22-second silence on the phone years ago when I told her I was turning down a pre-med scholarship at CU Boulder to become an educator instead. I had chosen to help kids like Elijah Jr., a little boy from a literacy camp who hugged me so hard his tiny ribs trembled when he finally learned to read a chapter book on his own. I chose meaning. She chose status. My eyes dragged down to the next line of the screenshot. Clara chose to be a lowly teacher. I no longer see her as my daughter. Please don't mention her name tomorrow. Underneath it, Audrey, my 41-year-old plastic surgeon sister, the one who casually rested her Cartier watch on restaurant tables so everyone could see it, had replied. Just a heart emoji. No defense. No hesitation. It took her exactly 45 seconds to agree to erase me. Then came Harrison, my older brother, the corporate lawyer who always made sure to park his heavy Range Rover in the most visible spot at every gathering. Understood. Mom. 2 words. Total compliance. Why are you telling me this? I whispered into the phone. The room suddenly felt like a freezer. The shadows in the corners of my apartment seemed to stretch and press inward. Because you're my family, Chloe cried quietly. Even if they've decided you're not theirs. I hung up the phone. I didn't cry. My chest felt tight, as if a thick steel band had been wrapped around my lungs and pulled shut. The exclusion hadn't actually happened tonight. I saw it now. It had been creeping in like a slow poison for years. I saw flashes of it in the dark. Being seated at a flimsy folding table with the toddlers last Thanksgiving while my mother adjusted her pearl earrings and smiled smoothly, saying she simply ran out of room. I remembered the handmade cashmere scarf I spent 4 weeks knitting her for New Year's, which I later found shoved into the back of her coat closet, still wrapped in its tissue paper. I sat alone on the edge of my bed. The apartment was completely still, save for the rain. I saved those screenshots into a new secure folder on my phone. I named it Proof. I didn't know then how much I would need it, or the war that was coming. I just knew I could never let those words disappear. I read the message 52 times. I counted. The harsh blue glow of my phone screen was the only light in the room, casting long, sharp shadows against the peeling paint of my walls. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a heavy, suffocating silence. I was a teacher. My brain was trained to look for context, for hidden meanings, for a cry for help disguised as anger. I scanned those digital lines like a student's essay, searching desperately for a loophole. I no longer see her as my daughter. There was no hidden meaning. It was a surgical strike. Precise. Deadly. I sat frozen on the edge of my mattress, my fingers digging so hard into the plastic phone case that my knuckles ached. The digital clock on my nightstand ticked forward. 1:00 a.m., then 2 a.m. I watched the timestamp on the messages. I waited for my father to type something, to push back. My father, who always stared at his expensive Italian leather shoes whenever my mother raised her voice. But the screen stayed dark. Not my aunt, not my father, not a single person in that group of 12 had typed a single word in my defense. By 3 a.m. the silence wasn't just in my apartment. It had settled deep into my bones. My family hadn't just watched me drown. They had handed my mother the rocks to tie around my ankles. Dawn broke hours later, painting the Colorado sky in pale, bruised purples. Easter Sunday. For the first time in 31 years, I didn't order white lilies for the Broadmoor dining table. I didn't put on a stiff dress and drive 120 miles just to be placed in a corner and ignored. Instead, I walked into my tiny kitchen and brewed a pot of cheap black coffee. The bitter steam rose into the cold air. I sat at my cramped table, pulled out a stack of history essays, and picked up my red pen. Grading grounded me. It was a system of rules and facts in a world that had just lost its gravity. As I marked a paper, my phone sat quietly next to my coffee mug. I thought about the options. I could drive down there. I could burst into the country club, shatter the crystal glasses, and scream until they were forced to look at me. But what would it change? She had chosen the approving nods of women at a country club over the daughter who had loved her for 3 decades. If she wanted me gone, I would give her exactly what she asked for. I picked up the phone. My thumb hovered over the screen, trembling just a fraction of an inch. Then I pressed down. Block Beatrice Kensington. Block Audrey Kensington. Block Harrison Kensington. 3 heavy, deliberate taps. I deleted my social media apps so I wouldn't have to see their curated perfect faces. I erased the bridge they had already burned. I thought the pain would end there. I didn't know the erasure was just beginning. The world kept spinning, cold and indifferent. 8 months passed. The bitter wind of November rattled my thin apartment windows. It was Thanksgiving night when my phone buzzed. "Chloe, the photos are up," she whispered over the line. Her voice was tight, filled with the background hum of her own family's awkward dinner. "Audrey just posted them." I swore to myself I wouldn't look. I held out for 4 agonizing hours. But the tension in my chest pulled tight like a piano wire, humming with a dark, painful curiosity. Finally, I logged in through a web browser. The image loaded slowly. My mother sat at the head of her long mahogany dining table, flanked by Audrey and Harrison. Their spouses stood perfectly posed behind them. The crystal stemware caught the chandelier's light. A massive turkey glistened in the center. The caption read, "Grateful for my amazing family. Mom, you raised us right." My breath hitched, catching sharply in my throat. It wasn't just that they looked happy without me. It was the table itself. They hadn't left an empty seat. They hadn't set a place for me, and left it blank. The chairs had been completely reconfigured. The table was set perfectly for 6. It was as if I had never existed at all. By Christmas, the isolation had become a heavy winter coat I couldn't take off. But in the digital age, a prominent family can't just pretend a daughter vanished into thin air without someone eventually asking questions. Chloe called me a week before New Year's. "Clara, she's lying to them." "Who?" I asked, staring out my frost-covered window. "Your mom." I was at the club luncheon. Chloe's voice shook with a mix of disbelief and anger. "Someone asked how you were doing." Your mom actually sighed, put her hand over her heart, and told Mrs. Henderson that you moved to an isolated rural commune off the grid. She said you've completely cut yourself off from civilized society because you resent their wealth. I let out a sharp, breathless laugh. It scraped my throat like sandpaper. A commune? When someone found your old LinkedIn page showing you were a teacher, she just waved her hand. She said it was a tiny, impoverished charity school, and that you aggressively refused all her financial help. She called you a tragic rebel, Clara. I closed my eyes. The cold truth washed over me, chilling me deeper than the winter draft. My mother didn't hate me. She hated what my existence said about her. She couldn't hide the fact that her daughter was a modest public school teacher, but she could spin it. She turned my dedication to my students into a tragic, dramatic tale of rebellion. She made herself the weeping victim of an ungrateful daughter. I was already a ghost to them. But now she was actively writing my obituary. She was burying the real me so she wouldn't have to explain the dirt on her hands. In that cold, quiet apartment, my grief hardened into something else. Something solid. I wouldn't beg to be loved by people who saw me as a stain. I was going to build a life so unshakable, so completely mine, that their lies would eventually shatter against it. The healing didn't happen like it does in the movies. It was slow, and it was loud, like ice cracking on a frozen lake. September 2014. The yellow doors of the school bus hissed open, letting in a rush of crisp autumn air. I stepped out onto the damp, crushed gravel of Hayes Family Farms. Around me, 35th graders buzzed with explosive energy, pointing at the massive red barn and the rolling rows of heritage pumpkins. As a teacher, my eyes constantly scanned the perimeter, counting heads, watching for the kid who might wander off. It was a habit I couldn't break, always anticipating the drop, always waiting for someone to slip away. That was when I saw him. Julian Hayes stood by a massive green tractor, wiping a grease-stained rag over his hands. He was tall, with broad shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of the 60-acre farm with ease. As I corralled the kids toward the orchard, he stepped forward. His work boots crunched heavily against the gravel. "You must be Miss Kensington," he said. His voice was a low, steady rumble. He extended a hand. I took it cautiously. His palm was rough, calloused from years of pulling life out of the dirt, with soil permanently embedded beneath his fingernails. It was the exact opposite of the soft, manicured hands of the men at my mother's country club. "I am," I said, offering a tight, professional smile. My walls were high then, built from thick, invisible bricks. "And you're Mr. Hayes. Thank you for hosting us." Julian's eyes, a sharp, observant brown, studied my face for a fraction of a second longer than a normal greeting. "My daughter hasn't stopped talking about you," he said. I blinked, the educator in me automatically flipping through my mental files. "Sophie," I said, my posture softening just a fraction. Sophie was a 6-year-old in the kindergarten class down the hall. I tutored her 3 afternoons a week. Sophie is an incredible kid, smart as a whip. She asks questions most adults are afraid to ask. A muscle feathered in Julian's jaw. The faint, polite smile vanished, replaced by a sudden heavy vulnerability. His eyes dropped to the ground for a split second before meeting mine again. "Her mother passed away last year," he said quietly, the words rough around the edges. "Cancer. Sophie's had a hard time opening up since then, but she says you're her favorite teacher in the whole school, even though you aren't technically hers." My chest tightened. I recognized that look in his eyes. It was the look of someone trying to hold together a house while the foundation was crumbling. "Sometimes," I told him, my voice dropping to a softer pitch, "the kids who hurt the most are the ones who look for the quietest corners to hide in. I just sit in the corner with her." Something shifted in the crisp air between us. It was a silent recognition, 2 people who understood what it meant to survive a devastating loss. That conversation by the tractor turned into a phone call. The phone call turned into a hesitant cup of coffee at a local diner, the clinking of cheap ceramic mugs covering the nervous thud of my heartbeat. And weeks later, it turned into a picnic under a massive twisting oak tree on the far edge of his property. The wind was biting that afternoon. I sat on a plaid blanket, pulling my jacket tighter around my shoulders. Julian handed me a slice of cold apple pie on a paper plate. "You never talk about your family, Clara," he said gently. He didn't look at me directly. He was giving me an out, watching the wind rustle the dry leaves. My pulse spiked, my breath caught, freezing in my throat. This was the moment. The trapdoor. In my experience, the moment you showed someone your broken pieces, they used them to cut you. My mind raced. What if he thinks I'm the problem? What if he realizes my own mother threw me away, and decides I'm not worth keeping around either? I squeezed the paper plate so hard the edges buckled. "I don't have one," I whispered. My voice shook, thin and brittle. "Or, they decided they don't have me." I braced for the interrogation. I waited for the awkward shifting, the judgmental micro-expressions, the polite excuses to leave. But Julian didn't move. He didn't ask for the gory details. He didn't push. He just set his plate down, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Family isn't always blood, Clara. Sometimes it's the people who show up when everyone else leaves." That was the exact second I stopped running. The next 10 years were a grueling, relentless climb. In 2016, Julian and I stood under that same oak tree and exchanged vows. There was no country club, no 400-person guest list, no crystal champagne flutes. Just Sophie, dropping handfuls of yellow leaves as our flower girl, and a small circle of friends. I officially adopted Sophie that same year. When the court paperwork finally cleared, she ran up to me and shoved a crumpled piece of paper into my hands. It was a crayon drawing of 3 stick figures under a bright yellow sun. At the bottom, in wobbly, uneven kindergarten letters, she had written, "My mom, my dad, me." I wept. I framed it. It sits on my desk to this day. While my sister Audrey was posting photos of European vacations and my brother Harrison was boasting about corporate mergers, I was grinding in the shadows. I spent my nights typing papers for my master's degree in educational leadership. The blue light of my laptop burned my exhausted eyes at 2 a.m., while Julian slept beside me. I ate cold sandwiches during 20-minute lunch breaks. I handled angry parents, crying students, and broken heating systems. In 2018, I fought for and won the assistant principal position at Cedar Grove. I was the first car in the icy parking lot at 6 a.m., and the last one to leave when the streetlights flickered on. 5 years later, the district board offered me the role of principal. I had built an empire out of the rubble my mother had left behind. But out there, miles away in her pristine colonial mansion, she was still telling her friends the lie. She was still pretending I was a wild, tragic failure. They had no idea who I had become, and the clock was ticking down to the moment they would finally find out. The heating vents in my office rattled with a low metallic hum. It was a freezing Monday morning in February 2025. Outside my window, the sky was the color of bruised iron. I sat at my large wooden desk, sipping lukewarm coffee, reviewing the district's newly adopted literacy budgets. The school was quiet, holding its breath before the morning bell unleashed 500 students into the hallways. Then, the red light on my desk phone began to blink. I stared at it for a second. In a school, an unexpected call before 7:30 a.m. usually meant a broken boiler or a teacher calling in sick. I picked up the heavy receiver. "Clara Hayes, principal's office." "Mrs. Kensington Hayes." The voice on the other end was formal, precise, and entirely unfamiliar. "This is Sylvia Vance from the Colorado Department of Education. Do you have a moment?" My spine straightened. My eyes flicked to the closed door of my office. "Yes, Miss Vance. How can I help you?" "The selection committee convened late last night to review the final nominations," she said, her tone smooth and practiced. "I'm calling to officially inform you that you have been selected as the 2025 Colorado State Educational Leader of the Year." The air left my lungs in one sudden, quiet rush. I stood up, but my legs felt entirely uncertain, vibrating with a strange, weightless shock. I had to grip the edge of the mahogany desk to steady myself. State Educational Leader of the Year. It was an award that recognized administrators who had fundamentally transformed their schools. It wasn't just a plaque. It was the highest honor in my field. I hadn't even known my own staff had finalized the nomination. "Are you—" My voice sounded thin, like it belonged to someone else. I could hear the smile in Miss Vance's voice. "Your track record speaks for itself, Clara. Literacy rates are up 22% in your district since you took over the curriculum modeling. Teacher retention is the highest in the region. Dr. Montgomery specifically endorsed your nomination. She told the board you were the best educational leader she'd ever worked with." Fiona Montgomery, my mentor from my very first year of teaching, who was now the state education commissioner. I thanked her, hung up the phone, and sank slowly back into my chair. I looked at Sophie's framed kindergarten drawing on my desk. For 12 years I had worked in the shadows. I had built a fortress of quiet, relentless dedication. But as the shock faded, a cold, creeping dread began to pool in my stomach. The announcement hit the state papers 3 weeks later. Local principal named state's top educational leader. The headline was printed in bold black ink across the front page of the Rocky Mountain Chronicle's education section, accompanied by my professional photo from the district website. I told myself no one in Denver would see it. I told myself my family didn't read public school news. I was wrong. That evening I was standing in my kitchen, slicing carrots for dinner. Julian was setting the table. The house was warm, smelling of roasting chicken and garlic. Then my cell phone buzzed against the marble counter. It vibrated once, then twice, then a steady, frantic buzzing. Chloe. I set the knife down. A heavy, familiar stone dropped into my stomach. I wiped my hands on a towel and answered, Chloe, Clara. She was breathless. I could hear the echo of a bathroom tile in the background. She was hiding. Your sister just posted the article in the family group chat. The kitchen seemed to tilt. The warm smell of dinner vanished, replaced by the metallic taste of adrenaline. What did she say? I asked, keeping my voice dangerously level. She just posted the link with the caption, Isn't this our Clara? Chloe hesitated. The silence on the line stretched, pulling tight like a rubber band. I was at Aunt Vivian's when it happened. Clara, your mom called Audrey immediately. I could hear her screaming through the phone speaker. Screaming? I repeated. Julian stopped setting the table. He looked at me, his jaw clenching. She was furious, Chloe whispered. Furious that you won the award. Furious that she didn't know, but mostly Clara. She was terrified. She's been telling the entire country club for a decade that you're living in a shack, avoiding society, and now there's photographic proof in the state paper that you've been a highly successful principal right under her nose. The lie is dead, Clara, and she knows it. My mother wasn't proud. She was trapped, and a trapped animal is always dangerous. The first strike came 4 days later. An email pinged in my inbox. The subject line read, From your mother. I sat at my laptop, the screen illuminating the dark office. My finger hovered over the trackpad. I could delete it. I should delete it. But my training as an educator kicked in. You always assess the threat before you react. I clicked open. My dearest Clara. It began. I saw the wonderful news about your award. I always knew you had it in you. We should meet for lunch soon. I'd love to hear about everything you've accomplished. Easter is coming up. It would mean so much to have the whole family together again. I read it 3 times. My heart didn't melt. It turned to ice. There was no apology, no mention of the 12 years of brutal silence, no acknowledgement of the WhatsApp message that had shattered me, just a breezy invitation, as if I had simply been away on a long vacation, and was now finally successful enough to be allowed back through the front door. I closed the laptop. I didn't reply, but they weren't going to give up easily. A week later, my phone rang, an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Claire, it's Audrey. Her voice was honeyed, dripping with a warm artificial sweetness I hadn't heard since we were children playing in the yard. Every alarm bell in my head went off. I didn't speak. I just listened to her breathe on the other end. I know it's been a while, she continued, her tone dipping into practiced theatrical sadness. But I wanted to reach out personally. Mom hasn't been feeling well, Clara. She's been asking about you. She really wants to see you. I gripped the phone. My mind analyzed the micro cues in her voice, the slight hesitation, the over-enunciation of feeling well. It was a script. What's wrong with her? I asked, my voice flat, giving her nothing to work with. Just stress. Audrey sighed perfectly. You know how her heart gets. She misses you, Clara. We all do. I hung up without saying goodbye. The silence in my house felt heavy, suffocating. I immediately dialed Chloe. Is my mother sick? I demanded the second she picked up. Chloe let out a sharp, bitter snort. Sick? Clara, she was at the Broadmoor Spa 2 days ago. She posted a selfie in the eucalyptus steam room complaining about the humidity. A beat of silence passed between us. Clara, they're not reaching out because they miss you. They're reaching out because you made the news. They want to be part of the headline. I already knew it, but hearing Chloe confirm it made the cold truth settle deep into my bones. The Kensington family didn't want their daughter back. They wanted their reputation back, and they were going to try and use me to get it. I wish I could tell you I was strong every single day. I wish I could say that the moment I read that email, I felt nothing but righteous anger and absolute certainty. But that wouldn't be the truth. The doubts crept in slowly, like freezing water seeping under a heavy door. It started at work. By mid-March, colleagues kept stopping me in the hallways to congratulate me. The school board sent flowers. Teachers I had mentored left small handwritten notes on my desk. Everyone wanted to shake my hand, ask about my plans for the district, share how proud they were. And then came the questions I dreaded. Your parents must be over the moon, my assistant principal, Mark, said one morning. He was beaming, a stack of budget reports in his hand. I bet your mom is bragging to everyone at her club. Are they flying in for the ceremony? My smile felt like brittle plastic stretching across my face. I nodded vaguely, muttered something about them being very busy, and changed the subject. The silence in my office after he left was deafening. That night, the snow outside our kitchen window was thick and silent. I sat at the table, a mug of tea turning cold between my hands. Julian stood at the sink, the rhythm of his washing dishes a steady grounding sound. Sophie, now 18 and preparing for college applications, was hunched over her laptop at the counter. The silence between Julian and me felt heavier than usual. It vibrated with the unspoken weight of Audrey's phone call. "You're somewhere else," Julian said without turning around. He dried his hands slowly. "Talk to me." I pressed the heels of my palms against my burning eyes. Audrey called again, left a voicemail. I looked up at him, my voice barely a whisper. Said Mom's been asking about me, that she misses me. Julian stopped moving. He turned to face me, his expression unreadable, waiting. "What if I'm wrong, Julian?" The words spilled out, tasting like ash in my mouth. "What if I've been too harsh? She's still my mother. Maybe I should just answer the phone, call her back, go to dinner. Pretend the last 12 years didn't happen," he asked quietly. "I don't know." My voice cracked, betraying the exhaustion I had carried for a decade. "I just keep thinking, everyone forgives family, right? That's what you're supposed to do. You read the articles, you watch the movies. Family is family. What if I'm the bad guy here? The stubborn, ungrateful daughter holding a grudge for 12 years? Julian didn't answer immediately. He walked into the hallway, his boots thudding softly on the hardwood, and disappeared into his small office. A moment later he returned with his heavy silver laptop. He set it on the kitchen table in front of me and flipped it open. The bright screen illuminated the dark kitchen. "I want to show you something," he said. His voice was a low, steady anchor in a storm. "Something I've been saving for a moment exactly like this." He clicked open a folder labeled Clara. "Do not delete." Inside were files I had almost forgotten existed. The first was a screenshot of my mother's WhatsApp message, the one Chloe had sent me 12 years ago. The timestamp glowed in the corner, April 3rd, 2013, 9:15 p.m. The words hadn't changed. They were just as sharp, just as cruel. "I no longer see her as my daughter." He clicked to the next file. My mother's email from a week ago. "My dearest Clara." No apology, no acknowledgement of the pain. Just a smooth pivot back into my life the second I became valuable. He clicked again. A photo from Audrey's Instagram, Thanksgiving 2013. The family portrait with the empty space where I should have been, the chairs perfectly arranged to erase me. "I saved everything," Julian said quietly, pulling up a chair beside me. "Every message Chloe forwarded over the years. Every lie she told at the country club that got back to us. Every photo that showed up online. I backed it all up to the cloud with timestamps and metadata." I stared at the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Why?" I breathed. He reached across the table and covered my trembling hand with his rough, warm palm. "Because I knew this day would come. I knew there'd be a moment when you'd forget why you walked away. I knew there'd be a night you'd sit in this kitchen and start wondering if you were the one who failed." He turned the laptop slightly so I had to look directly at the evidence of my own erasure. "You didn't fail, Clara," he said fiercely. "You survived. You built a life. You became someone, not despite them but without them." The knot in my chest, the one that had been tightening for weeks, finally began to loosen. The guilt dissolved, leaving behind a cold, clear clarity. "You don't owe forgiveness to people who never asked for it," Julian continued softly. "You only owe yourself the truth." I closed the laptop slowly. The soft click of the lid shutting echoed in the quiet kitchen. I looked up at him. "Chloe sent you something else," I said, reading the subtle shift in his posture. "What is it?" Julian hesitated. A muscle feathered in his jaw. "Are you sure you want to see it?" I nodded. He pulled out his phone, his thumb swiping across the screen. He placed it face up on the table, sliding it toward me. It was one more screenshot, a new message from the family group chat, dated just 2 days ago. And when I read it, every last drop of doubt evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp anger. The glow of the phone screen was the only light left in the kitchen. I stared at the bright digital rectangle, reading the new screenshot from the Kensington family group chat. The message was from my mother, dated just 24 hours ago. "Wonderful news. Clara is being honored at the state ceremony next week. It will be televised. I've already confirmed our attendance. We'll arrive early, sit in the VIP family section, and join her on stage for photos. Audrey, wear your blue Prada. Harrison, bring Jillian. This is an opportunity to show everyone that the Kensington family stands together. My eyes locked onto that last sentence. An opportunity. Below it, Audrey had replied. Already picked out my dress. Should I bring flowers? And then Harrison, I'll clear my schedule. Good PR move. I read the words slowly. I didn't cry. My heart didn't break. It turned to stone. Not a single person in that chat had asked if I wanted them there. Not one message mentioned an apology, a desire to reconnect, or even a private phone call before showing up at the biggest moment of my career. They're planning to hijack your ceremony, Julian said. His voice was thick with controlled, quiet anger. He leaned over the table, his shadow stretching across the floor. Walk in like nothing happened, pose for the cameras, take all the credit. I looked at my mother's careful orchestration. This wasn't a family reunion. It was a heist. She wanted to reclaim the narrative. She wanted to stand beside me on a brightly lit stage and pretend she had supported me all along, fixing her damaged reputation in front of the entire state. They don't want me back, I said, the realization settling cold and final in my chest. I looked up at Julian, my vision crystal clear. They just want the version of me they can show off. Julian nodded slowly. So what are we going to do? 10 minutes later, my laptop was open again. Chloe's face appeared on the screen via video call. The three of us gathered around the kitchen table like generals planning a defense. You could uninvite them, Chloe suggested. Her pixelated image frowned, her voice tinny through the computer speakers. Call the venue security. Have them removed at the door if they try to enter. No, I said instantly, my mind working through the variables like I was untangling a complex school board dispute. If I ban them, I become the villain. They'll tell everyone I'm the unstable, ungrateful daughter who barred her own loving mother from a public event. That's exactly the story they want to tell. So what's the alternative? Julian asked, his brow furrowed. You let them waltz in and pretend they've been your biggest cheerleaders this whole time. I stared at the dark window, watching the snow fall. I had spent 12 years building a life based on truth and hard work. I wasn't going to let them turn my reality into a cheap stage play. No, I said finally. We let them come. We don't cause a scene beforehand. We don't warn them, and we don't confront them. I took a deep, steadying breath, and then when I give my acceptance speech in front of 800 educators, 4 news cameras, and the governor of Colorado, I thank my family. Chloe's face on the screen went perfectly still. Clara, I thank my family. I repeated, the plan solidifying in my mind like setting concrete. My husband Julian, who believed in me when no one else did. My daughter Sophie, who taught me what unconditional love looks like. And that's it. That is the entire list. Silence hung heavily in the warm kitchen. You're not going to mention them at all, Julian said slowly. A faint, proud smile touched the corners of his mouth. Why would I asked, picking up my phone and looking at the old 2013 screenshot one last time. They aren't my family. They made that clear a decade ago. I don't need to yell. I don't need to expose them or read their texts out loud. I just need to not include them. The absence will speak for itself. And if your mother tries to come on stage anyway? Chloe asked, leaning closer to her camera. I smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it was genuine. Then I will remind her, very politely, that I am simply honoring the boundaries she set. She said I wasn't her daughter. I'm just taking her at her word. The plan was set, but my mother had always been 10 steps ahead, and I had underestimated how desperate she was. 4 days before the ceremony, I was sitting in my office at the school when my desk phone rang. Clara, we need to talk. It was Dr. Fiona Montgomery. Her voice carried a sharp, no-nonsense directness that instantly made the hairs on my arms stand up. Something's come up with the event programming. I gripped the receiver. The ticking of the wall clock suddenly sounded incredibly loud. What happened? Someone contacted the ceremony coordinator last week, Fiona said, her tone dipping lower. A woman named Beatrice Kensington. She said she was your mother. My stomach plummeted. She requested to speak during the family remarks portion of the program, Fiona continued, the disgust barely hidden in her voice. She wanted 5 minutes to say a few words about raising you. The coordinator passed the request to me since I'm giving your introduction speech. I turned it down immediately. I closed my eyes, letting out a long, shaky breath. Thank you, Fiona. I'm so sorry she put you in that position. Clara, I don't know the full story of your family, Fiona said gently. You've never told me, and I've never asked, but I know you. I've watched you work for years. I know that if you wanted your mother involved, you would have mentioned her yourself. Nobody gets to rewrite your story but you. I appreciate that more than you know, I whispered. Fiona sighed. The sound crackled through the phone line. But there is one problem, Clara. The venue is controlled by the State Capitol building, not the Department of Education. I just found out from the logistics team that your brother Harrison bypassed our guest list entirely. My eyes snapped open. What? He used his law firm's status as a major political donor, Fiona explained grimly. He requested VIP lanyards directly through a state senator's office. They have all access passes to the second row. Security at the door cannot stop them, Clara. Their credentials came straight from the Capitol. When I hung up the phone, the silence in my office felt electric. I looked out my window at the playground. They weren't just coming, they were forcing their way into the VIP section, right behind my husband and daughter. They thought they could bully their way back into my life. But they didn't realize they were walking straight into a trap of their own making. The night before the ceremony, the house was so quiet it felt like it was holding its breath. I sat alone at the kitchen table, wrapped in a thick wool sweater. A single cup of chamomile tea steamed next to a blank yellow notepad. Sophie had gone to bed an hour ago, pausing in the doorway to wave. "Good luck tomorrow, Mom. You're going to be amazing," she had whispered. Julian was in the living room, reading a book, deliberately giving me the silent space I needed. I stared at the blank page, my black pen hovering over the blue lines. The weight of 12 years pressed heavily against my chest. Tomorrow, I would stand in front of 800 people and 4 television cameras. I had to write my acceptance speech. I would like to thank. My pen remained frozen. Who did I thank? My colleagues at Cedar Grove, obviously. They were the ones who stayed late to help me build the new reading programs. Dr. Montgomery, who saw potential in a young, exhausted teacher. The students who made every frustrating, tear-filled day worth it. But then, I reached the hardest part. The family section. I closed my eyes and pictured my mother. Right at this exact moment, 70 miles away in Denver, Beatrice Kensington was probably laying out her ivory Dior outfit. She was likely standing in front of a gilded mirror, practicing her proud, tearful mother's smile. I could almost smell her heavy, expensive perfume. I imagined Audrey trying on her blue Prada dress, practicing her camera-ready angles. My pen finally touched the paper. The scratching sound was loud in the empty kitchen. I want to thank my family. The family I chose, and the family that chose me back. My husband Julian, who saw me when I was invisible. My daughter Sophie, who taught me that love isn't something you earn, it's something you give freely. I drew a sharp final line under the words and put the pen down. That was enough. That was everything. There would be no mention of the Kensington name, just the absolute, unshakable truth. Done. Julian's low voice drifted from the hallway. He stood leaning against the doorframe, watching me. Done. I said. My voice didn't shake. Tomorrow, for the first time in a decade, I would let my silence speak louder than their lies. As we walked up the wide stone steps the next morning, the winter sun glinted off the massive glass facades and the towering dome that seemed to touch the sky. It felt like walking into a coliseum. Inside, the grand auditorium was buzzing with a nervous, electric energy. 800 chairs were arranged in perfectly straight, sweeping rows. The room was packed with principals, teachers, school board members, and superintendents from every corner of the state. Along the side aisles, 4 news crews were setting up heavy tripods, the red lights of their 4K cameras already blinking in the dim room. I stepped up to the registration table, smoothing my hands over my navy blue dress. Julian stood tall beside me, his hand resting securely on the small of my back. Sophie held my other hand tightly. A volunteer with a bright smile handed me a heavy gold-trimmed lanyard. Clara Kensington Hayes, 2025 Colorado State Educational Leader of the Year. Congratulations, Mrs. Hayes, the volunteer said warmly. Your family must be so proud. I looked down at Sophie, whose eyes were wide with awe, and then up at Julian. They are, I smiled. We walked down the long carpeted aisle to the very front row, reserved specifically for honorees and their immediate families. Sophie sat between Julian and me, wearing a soft yellow dress we had picked out together. Mom, she whispered, suddenly tugging on my sleeve. She pointed toward the stage. Is that your name up there? I looked up. A massive canvas banner stretched 60 feet across the back of the stage, glowing under the bright theatrical lights. Colorado State Educational Leader of the Year 2025. Clara Kensington Hayes. It was impossible to ignore. My name, written in giant bold letters. I squeezed Sophie's hand, a lump rising in my throat. Yeah, sweetheart. That's my name. For 10 minutes, we sat in a peaceful, happy bubble. And then, the air behind me shifted. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. A cold, prickling sensation crawled down my spine. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. In my profession, you learn to feel the temperature of a room change before you hear a sound. Excuse me. Yes, that's my daughter up there. The honoree. I need to be in the VIP family section. The voice cut through the low murmur of the crowd like a silver knife. It was my mother. She was using that practiced, commanding tone she usually saved for scolding waiters or directing country club staff. Breathe, I told myself. Just breathe. From my peripheral vision, I watched them descend the aisle like a royal delegation. My mother led the pack, dripping in ivory Dior, a string of thick, flawless pearls resting at her throat. Audrey followed close behind, her blue Prada dress perfectly pressed, her phone already in her hand, scanning the room for cameras. Harrison brought up the rear in a sharp Armani suit, his wife Jillian trailing like a shadow. They swept into the second row, slipping past the velvet ropes using their donor-secured passes. They sat directly behind us. The rustling of expensive fabric and the clinking of jewelry was deafening to my ears. I could smell the sharp floral notes of Audrey's perfume invading my space. I'm Beatrice Kensington, my mother stage whispered to a bewildered school superintendent sitting next to her. She spoke just loud enough for me to hear every syllable. Clara's mother. I raised that girl from the day she was born. Everything she is, she owes to me. The superintendent nodded politely, looking uncomfortable. Then, I felt a rush of air as Audrey leaned forward. She was so close I could feel the heat of her breath against my neck. Clara, she murmured, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. You look well. I stared straight ahead at the empty wooden podium on the stage. I didn't blink. I didn't move a single muscle. Suddenly, a heavy hand dropped onto my right shoulder. It squeezed, hard. Aren't you going to say hello to your family? Harrison's voice was casual, dripping with the terrifying entitlement of a man who had never been told no. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my face remained perfectly smooth. I turned my head just slightly, not enough to actually look at them, but just enough for my voice to carry over my shoulder. My family, I said, my voice as cold and hard as the marble floors beneath us, is sitting right next to me. Harrison's hand flinched and slowly withdrew from my shoulder. Before anyone could say another word, the auditorium lights dimmed. A sudden hush fell over the crowd of 800 people. The red recording lights on the news cameras glowed brightly in the shadows. Dr. Fiona Montgomery stepped out from behind the velvet curtains and walked confidently toward the podium. She adjusted the microphone, the feedback whining briefly in the massive room, and surveyed the crowd. The trap was set, and my mother was sitting right in the middle of it. Dr. Fiona Montgomery adjusted the microphone. The brief, high-pitched whine of feedback echoed through the massive auditorium, forcing the room into absolute pin-drop silence. 800 pairs of eyes locked onto the stage. The red lights of the news cameras glowed steadily in the dark aisles. In 20 years of working in Colorado's education system, Fiona began, her voice ringing out with calm, unquestionable authority. I have had the privilege of meeting thousands of extraordinary teachers, but today, I want to tell you about an educator who stands completely apart. Behind me I heard the rustle of stiff, expensive fabric. My mother was shifting in her seat, sitting up straighter. I could practically hear her adjusting her pearls, preparing her face for the cameras. She was waiting for her name. She was waiting for the validation she believed she had bought with her VIP pass. Fiona looked directly out into the crowd, her eyes finding mine. Clara Kensington Hayes started her career in a rural elementary school with limited resources and unlimited determination. Fiona paused, letting the words hang in the air. She didn't come from a background that supported this path. She didn't have privilege handed to her on a silver platter. A sharp, sudden intake of breath hissed from the row right behind me. My heart hammered against my ribs. Fiona knew exactly what she was doing. Without knowing the gritty details of my past, she was systematically dismantling my mother's country club lies in front of the entire state. She built everything herself, Fiona continued, her voice rising with fierce pride. Her master's degree, earned while teaching full-time, her absolute transformation of Cedar Grove, and her family. Fiona smiled warmly, gesturing toward the front row, which I have the honor of introducing now. Her husband Julian, who has served on the Douglas County School Board for 7 years, and her beautiful daughter Sophie. Above the stage, the massive digital screens switched feeds. The camera didn't pan to the VIP row. It didn't show my mother's ivory Dior or Audrey's blue Prada. The screens filled with a close-up of Julian, who was smiling with quiet, unshakable pride, and Sophie, who was beaming so hard her eyes were crinkling. The crowd erupted into warm applause. Behind me, the silence from the second row was so thick and toxic it felt like smoke. "Please welcome your 2025 Colorado State Educational Leader of the Year," Fiona announced over the clapping. "Clara Kensington Hayes." Julian squeezed my hand, his rough palm grounding me. I stood up. My legs, which had felt like heavy lead moments before, were suddenly steady. I walked up the short flight of carpeted steps to the stage. The heat of the theatrical spotlights hit my face, bright and blinding. When I reached the wooden podium, I gripped the edges. I looked out at the sea of faces. 800 people, 4 news cameras, and in the second row, perfectly illuminated by the spill of the stage lights, 4 people in designer clothes sat frozen, waiting for the apology and acknowledgement they fully believed I owed them. "Thank you, Dr. Montgomery," I began. My voice boomed through the speakers, steady and clear. It didn't shake. "And thank you to the Colorado Department of Education, the governor's office, and everyone who made today possible." I looked out at the audience, the real audience, the tired, dedicated teachers, the principals who worked 80-hour weeks. When I started teaching, I said, choosing my words with careful, deliberate precision, I didn't know if I would last a single semester. Some people, I paused. I let the silence stretch for 3 heavy seconds. Questioned whether it was a path worth taking. The silence in the room vibrated. It was a heavy, knowing quiet. "But here is what I learned," I continued, my voice softening just a fraction. "Education isn't about proving your worth to anyone. It's about showing up for the kids who need you, especially when no one else does. It is about being the person in the corner when the rest of the world has walked away." I took a deep breath. The air in my lungs felt clean and sharp. This was it, the moment the trap finally snapped shut. "Which brings me to my thank yous," I said. In the second row, my mother leaned forward. I could see the top of her blonde hair from the stage. Audrey held her phone up, ready to record the moment their family name was praised. "To my colleagues at Cedar Grove, you are my village. To Dr. Montgomery, who saw something in me when I was just starting out, I owe you more than words can say." I turned away from the crowd and looked directly down at the front row. "And to my family." I smiled at Julian. I smiled at Sophie, my husband Julian, who believed in me when I had stopped believing in myself, and my daughter Sophie, who reminds me every single day what unconditional love actually looks like. I stopped speaking. I held my head high, looking right at my husband and my child. That was the list. The auditorium was totally silent for 2 agonizing, stretched-out seconds. It was a silence so profound I could hear the faint hum of the electrical lights above me. I didn't say the Kensington name. I didn't thank my mother for raising me. I didn't thank my siblings for their support. I simply let the blank space where they wanted to be speak for itself. The applause started slowly, then built into a roaring wave. But underneath the sound of clapping hands, a loud, sharp scrape echoed from the second row. A chair was being pushed back roughly against the marble floor. "Clara." My mother's voice pierced through the applause. She wasn't whispering anymore. She was standing up, her hands clutching her expensive pearl necklace. Her face flushed a dark, angry red. The cameras instantly swiveled away from me, their lenses zooming in on the woman in the ivory dress who was now stepping out of her row and moving toward the center aisle. The final confrontation had begun. "Clara." The single word cut through the fading applause like a gunshot in a quiet canyon. From my vantage point behind the podium, the entire auditorium seemed to drop into slow motion. Beatrice Kensington stepped out from the second row and into the wide red-carpeted center aisle. The heavy, blinding theatrical spotlights caught the pearls at her throat. She stood perfectly straight, her shoulders pulled back, her face arranged into a mask of wounded maternal confusion. The low hum of 800 people shifting in their seats filled the massive room. The 4 news cameras stationed in the aisles pivoted instantly. The smooth, mechanical whir of their lenses focusing sounded incredibly loud in the sudden, suffocating silence. She took a step forward. Her high heels clicked sharply against the exposed marble near the edge of the carpet. Click, click, click. My pulse spiked, a primal surge of fight or flight flooding my veins. For a fraction of a second, I was a terrified 20-something again, shrinking under the weight of her disapproval. But then my training kicked in. I had spent the last decade managing crisis situations, de-escalating hostile parents, and holding my ground in rooms full of angry people. I gripped the thick, solid edges of the oak podium. I anchored my feet to the stage. I was exactly where I belonged. "Clara, sweetheart," Beatrice called out. Her voice was amplified by the sheer acoustics of the domed ceiling. It was a masterclass in manipulation, pitch-perfect sorrow, laced with a hard underlying command that only a daughter could truly hear. Fix this. Acknowledge me. Do as you are told. She reached the bottom of the stage steps. She didn't look at the crowd. She kept her eyes locked entirely on me. Her lips stretched into a tight, trembling smile meant for the cameras. I'd just like to say a few words about my daughter. About how proud I am of everything she's— Mrs. Kensington. I didn't shout. I didn't raise my voice. I leaned exactly 1 inch closer to the microphone, letting the state-of-the-art audio system do the work. The 2 words boomed through the auditorium speakers, low, steady, and absolutely frigid. Beatrice stopped mid-sentence. Her right foot hovered over the first carpeted stair. The title Mrs. Kensington, not Mom, struck her like a physical blow. Her flawless smile flickered, the edges turning brittle. Thank you for attending, I said smoothly, meeting her eyes for the first time in 12 years. But the family portion of my speech has concluded. A collective, jagged breath was sucked in by the front rows. Beatrice's eyes widened, a flash of genuine panic breaking through her carefully constructed armor. She wasn't used to a microphone she couldn't control. She took half a step up the stairs, her voice dropping the sorrowful act and taking on a sharper, desperate edge. Clara, please. I am your mother. I looked down at her. In the harsh glare of the stage lights, I finally saw her not as a towering, terrifying force, but as an aging woman desperately trying to hold on to a lie that was slipping through her fingers. You said you no longer saw me as your daughter. The words fell from the speakers and dropped into the silent room like heavy stones into a still pond. Beatrice froze. The color drained completely from her face, leaving her pale beneath her expensive makeup. 12 years ago, I continued, my voice perfectly level, stripping away every layer of her country club fiction. On April 3rd, at 9:15 p.m., in a group message to our relatives. You said I chose to be a lowly teacher. You told everyone I was no longer part of your family, and you asked them never to mention my name again. Gasps rippled through the auditorium. The sound was undeniable. Hundreds of educators, people who had dedicated their lives to the very profession my mother had used as a weapon, reacting in real time. I have simply honored your decision, I said, my voice echoing in the rafters. The family I thank today is the family that stood by me. The family that did not require me to prove my worth through a job title or a bank account. From the corner of my eye I saw a Capitol security guard in a dark blazer moving swiftly and silently down the side aisle. He approached Beatrice gently, raising a hand to respectfully guide her away from the stage steps. For the first time in my entire life my mother had absolutely nothing to say. Her lips parted but no sound came out. Her perfect posture crumbled. The silence stretched for exactly 6 seconds. It was a heavy electric quiet, vibrating with the sheer weight of the truth. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the chamber, a sound broke the tension. Clap, clap, clap. A gray-haired woman, maybe a retired superintendent, or a veteran history teacher, stood up from her seat. Her clapping was slow, deliberate, and fiercely loud. A man next to her stood up and joined in. Then 8 people. Then 30. The applause built like a tidal wave, rolling forward from the back of the room, crashing over the aisles until every single educator in that massive 800-seat auditorium was on their feet. The roar was deafening. They weren't just clapping for the award anymore. They were giving me the one thing my own mother never had, validation without conditions. The security guard murmured something to Beatrice, gesturing back toward the second row. She turned around. I watched as Audrey reached out, grabbing our mother's arm, her face pale with humiliation, whispering something frantic. Beatrice shook her off violently. I caught fragments of whispers from the VIP rows closest to the stage. Did you hear what she said? Her own mother disowned her for being a teacher. That's the woman who called her lowly. Every single whisper, caught on camera and witnessed by the state's most prominent figures, was another nail in the coffin of Beatrice Kensington's carefully curated reputation. I didn't watch them sit back down in disgrace. I turned my eyes to the front row. Sophie was standing on her tiptoes, clapping so hard her hands were a blur. Tears were streaming down her face, but her smile was radiant. She looked up at me, the bright stage lights reflecting in her eyes, and mouthed, "Warfold one. You did it, Mom." Julian stood beside her, his dark eyes shining with a fierce, quiet pride. He gave me a single slow nod. I smiled back at them. Just them. The marble hallway outside the grand auditorium was cooler, the air thick with the muffled hum of the crowd still buzzing inside. I had just finished shaking hands and taking photos with the governor. Julian and Sophie were standing a few feet away, talking quietly to Fiona. I turned toward the exit, my chest lighter than it had been in a decade. And then, I saw them. They were waiting in the alcove near the heavy oak doors. My mother flanked by Audrey and Harrison. Their posture was rigid, their faces pale and tightly controlled. What they didn't realize, but what my trained eyes caught immediately, was the young man standing just a few feet to their left. He was an independent education journalist, I recognized from local podcasts, holding a heavy professional vlogging rig. His 4K camera lens was pointed directly at us, a tiny red recording light blinking steadily in the dim hallway as he gathered behind-the-scenes footage. Clara, my mother's voice was low, completely stripped of its theatrical sorrow. It was a sharp, trembling hiss. She stepped out of the shadows, her high heels echoing sharply against the stone floor. We need to talk privately. I didn't step back. I kept my voice pleasant, measured, and perfectly professional. If you have something to say, Mrs. Kensington, you can say it here. Her eyes darted left and right, scanning the scattered groups of people lingering near the exits. She stepped closer, the heavy scent of her perfume suffocating the clean hallway air. You humiliated me in front of everyone on television. You made me look like a monster. I didn't make you look like anything, I said quietly, holding my ground. I simply stated a fact. I reached into my purse. My fingers wrapped around the cold, smooth casing of my phone. I pulled it out, unlocked the screen, and opened the folder labeled Proof. I didn't whisper. I didn't try to hide it. I held the bright, glowing screen of my phone up right between us, angling it perfectly so the journalist's camera over my mother's shoulder could capture every single pixel. This is the message you sent on April 3, 2013, I said, my voice carrying clearly down the hall. I no longer see her as my daughter. Your words, your decision, I simply honored it. My mother's face went paper white, her eyes fixed on the bright screen. I was upset. You know how things get taken out of context in texts. Context. I swiped to the next image, showing the timestamps. This was a group message instructing everyone in our family to pretend I had ceased to exist. You told people I lived in a commune. There is no other context. Harrison stepped forward, smoothly slipping a hand into his expensive suit pocket. The lawyer, trying to manage the damage. Clara, let's be reasonable. We can sit down and talk about this like adults. I was reasonable for 31 years, Harrison, I replied, my pulse steady, my breathing calm. I was reasonable when you seated me at a folding table with the toddlers. I was reasonable when you all decided my career made me disposable. I am done being reasonable. Audrey's mask cracked. The poised, untouchable plastic surgeon vanished. She leaned in close, her eyes narrowing into vicious slits, entirely unaware that the directional microphone mounted on the journalist's camera was pointing right at her face. This is ridiculous, Audrey hissed, her voice dripping with venom. We came here to support you. We rearranged our entire schedules, and you treat us like garbage. You came here for a photo opportunity, I said, meeting her furious gaze. I read your messages from yesterday, Audrey. Should I bring flowers? That wasn't about support. That was stage direction. Her face flushed a dark, blotchy red. Harrison's eyes finally flicked over my shoulder. He saw the red blinking light. As a man who spent his life protecting corporate assets, he instantly understood the liability of a hot microphone. His jaw clenched. Clara, think about this from a PR perspective. People in there are calling Mom exactly what she is. You're making this worse for the family name. I haven't had that name in almost a decade, I said. I raised my left hand, letting the hallway light catch the simple worn gold band on my ring finger. I'm a Hayes now. And the funny thing about a family name, Harrison, is that it only means something if the family behind it is real. Audrey took half a step closer. The camera captured every tremor of her anger. You think you're better than us, don't you? Just because you got some cheap plastic trophy. No, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper that somehow carried more weight than a shout. I think I am exactly what I have always been, a teacher. The same teacher you called lowly, the same teacher Mom was too embarrassed to mention at her country club. I didn't become better than you. You just decided I wasn't good enough, and I stopped trying to change your minds. Behind me I heard the steady, comforting thud of Julian's work boots. Sophie's hand slipped into mine, her fingers warm and grounding. Ready to go home? Julian asked. His presence was a massive, unmovable wall at my back. More than ready, I said. I turned to face my mother one last time. She looked incredibly small, standing in the middle of the cold hallway, her 5 years of careful reputation building completely undone in 5 minutes. "Mrs. Kensington," I said softly, 12 years ago you made a choice. You chose your image over your own child. I could hate you for that, but hating you would mean you still controlled my life. And you don't. I'm doing this because I finally learned the difference between forgiveness and self-respect." I stepped back. "Goodbye, Mrs. Kensington. Audrey, Harrison." We walked out the heavy oak doors, into the bright, freezing Colorado sunlight, and we never looked back. The fallout did not happen overnight. It happened the exact moment that independent journalist uploaded his video. He titled it, "When Narcissists Try to Steal the Spotlight." The video included the high-quality 4K footage from the hallway. Viewers could pause the video and read the exact WhatsApp screenshot I had held up. They could clearly read Audrey's little heart emoji. Chloe called me 2 weeks later, laughing in sheer breathless disbelief. "Audrey is having a total meltdown," she said. Someone on TikTok analyzed the timestamps on the messages from the video. They calculated that her response time to "Mom disowning you" was exactly 45 seconds. Her clinic's Yelp page is flooded with people saying great nose jobs but takes only 45 seconds to banish her sister. She had to delete her entire Instagram. Harrison's world unraveled quietly, the way things do in the professional class. State politicians who usually eagerly accepted his campaign donations suddenly found themselves too busy to return his calls. Nobody wanted their political campaign associated with the viral lawyer who bullied his award-winning sister in a hallway. And my mother? She was forced to quietly resign from the country club social committee. Women were pulling her aside in the locker room, asking pointed questions she couldn't answer about why she had lied for a decade about her daughter living in a remote commune, when in reality Clara was building a legacy just 2 counties away. 7 months later, the dust finally settled. I learned what absolute, unshakable peace actually feels like. I was still the principal at Cedar Grove. The district was thriving. Every morning when I walked into my office, I turned on the lights and looked at Sophie's faded crayon drawing, still pinned proudly above my desk. On our anniversary in September, Julian and I had another picnic under the old oak tree on the farm. The wind was crisp, smelling of dry leaves and apples. Sophie, home for the weekend from her freshman year of college, was helping Julian set out the plates. "Someone from a publishing house called the school board last week," Julian mentioned casually, handing me a slice of pie. "They saw the viral video. They want you to write a book about your career, your journey, all of it." I took a bite of the pie and shook my head, smiling softly. "I don't want to live in the past. If I ever tell this story publicly, it will be entirely on my terms. Not for revenge, not for profit, just to let someone else know they aren't alone." The letter arrived on a cold Thursday in November. There was no return address. Just my name, written in the elegant sweeping cursive my mother had spent years perfecting. I sat at the kitchen table holding the thick, cream-colored envelope. Julian sat across from me, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, watching me carefully. "You don't have to open it," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. I slid my thumb under the seal and opened it anyway. The heavy paper unfolded in my hands. "Clara, I have written this letter 55 times. I was afraid. I was afraid of what people would think. I was afraid that your choices somehow reflected a failure in me. I do not expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know I was wrong. You don't owe me a response. But if you ever want to talk, I'll be here. Your mother." I read it twice. I felt the familiar shape of her letters, the physical proof of her shame. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel the sudden overwhelming urge to call her. I just felt a quiet, profound sense of closure. I folded the paper carefully, walked over to the kitchen counter and placed it in the back of a drawer. "What are you going to do?" Julian asked, his voice a low, comforting rumble. I looked out the window at the rolling hills of the farm, at the oak tree standing strong against the winter wind. "I don't know," I said, "but for the first time in my life I think I don't need to know yet. You know what kept me awake for months after all of this happened? Why would a mother erase her own child? In my years as an educator, I've learned that people replicate the systems that raised them. Beatrice Kensington grew up in a family where love was entirely transactional. She learned very early that your worth equals your performance. When Audrey became a plastic surgeon and Harrison became a corporate lawyer, my mother wasn't just proud, she was relieved. Their status protected her from the deep, unspoken shame she had carried since her own childhood. And then there was me, the daughter who picked a modest, quiet profession that made Beatrice feel exposed. Explaining my career felt like explaining a failure. So she did what terrified, emotionally hollow people do. She cut out the part that hurt her image. It does not excuse her, but understanding it helped me realize something incredibly important. Her rejection was never actually about my worth. It was about her wounds. If you have ever been in my shoes, sitting at the folding table, handed the scraps of your family's affection, please hear me. You are not responsible for healing the people who hurt you. You can understand them without excusing them. Boundaries aren't walls built out of anger. They are doors, and you are the only one who gets to hold the key. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. I'm Clara, and I finally know what family really means. If this journey resonated with you, if you've ever had to build your own table instead of begging for a seat at someone else's, I invite you to stay connected. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. There is immense power in sharing our deepest, most honest truths, and this space is dedicated to stories of real resilience, quiet victories, and the families we choose. Join me here, and let's keep exploring the stories that truly matter.